So let me just briefly introduce what this panel is about. So as you know, we humans are social beings. I mean, we learned all this social interaction, social skills from the beginning of our life in early age and then juvenile. And while we keep learning these social skills, and social life is a part of like essence of our lives. And then of course, technology kind of trying to improve these social aspects in our lives. And then traditionally, we use like a post mails to communicate with other people and letters and like some technology, like computing technology. Or now we have a mobile device and we virtually connected to everybody over the world through social network services. And at the same time, as a XR, augmented reality or virtual reality researcher, we developed a lot of amazing technology, like including these head-mounted displays. And also these augmented and virtual reality has been used in many different areas, like e-commerce or the navigation or gaming or training and simulation. So as you can see, we're actually facing the golden era of this technology. So now this technology is actually looking at this social aspect so that we can connect people all over the world through this virtual or augmented reality. So we're facing these all the different social VR platforms and social augmented reality and mobile devices, and people can actually develop their own avatar and then share that emotions through the mobile devices. And of course, all these social VR or social AR is kind of focusing on the remote communication and collaboration. And then this COVID-19 pandemic actually emphasized the importance of this social interaction. As we are doing this conference virtually, the use of these video conferencing tools like Zoom or Discord, this kind of video conferencing tool is prevalent at this point. And the revenue of this video conferencing tool is increasingly growing. And what about this social XR technology, social VRs or social AR? And recently, like in September, John Kamek, the Facebook Reality Lab consulting CTO, mentioned that he was kind of embarrassed over Facebook's social VR. Mainly the point is that we were not really ready for this social VR technology. There are not so many social VR apps, social AR apps, even if the potential to use this technology in this era, pandemic of COVID-19 is very high. We were not really ready at the time. So I'd like to have that kind of perspective in our mind, and we'd like to discuss about where we are now about this social AR, XR technology and where we're going in terms of the research and technology and all the different application domains, and then what's the resulting social issues or ethical issues. So at this point in this slide, I only mentioned about kind of like a remote collaboration, remote communication aspect of the social VR or AR, but this technology can be used any kind of like face-to-face interaction to improve the our social experience, like recognize other people's emotion and then augment that kind of stuff, or the augmenting the pointing directions to improve the user's communication cues. So I'd like to kind of cover in a broader sense of these, and then I would like to start with all the presentations from the panelists. Let's start from Hennis now. Let me just stop my slide, and can you share your slide?
Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me? I guess you can if you want me to start.
Yes.
First, it is so nice to be asked to be here on social interaction, and it's so nice to see so many of you, old friends and new. And I encourage people and hosts, if we allow it, since there are all of 21 people here, to encourage people to turn on their video so we could experience more social interaction. It's so nice to see you, Anthony. It's like, I'm sorry we can't be in person, but it makes me feel good just to see you.
Henry and I are due to exchange students at the moment, but we haven't been managed.
Yes, soon we will exchange them. And it's so nice to see Gerd, and I almost see Ryan, who I haven't seen in person in a long time. So this is great. The high order bit, as Andy Van Dam would say, is one, that we already have social interaction. But let me show a couple of slides. Share screen desktop 3. And let me optimize for video clip. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just turn on. Thank you. I mean, there's so few of us. I encourage people to turn on their audio also, and the host, whoever is looking at it, if somebody's typing or, inadvertently making some noise, we can mute them. Okay, but I love seeing the social interaction, hearing it. Okay, so I have only like 5 slides. The major thing I want to talk about is that I think if there's one thing we need to enhance social interaction, it's not more apps. It's better technology, specifically in AR eyeglasses. And here is one scenario that we're working on. Can you see my cursor, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So here's drawing by my collaborator, Andre State. So we all know about things in telepresence, but the new thing here is that telepresence so far requires an installation of a large number of cameras. And I personally think that that is a major limiting factor. It's like the limiting factor when we had televideo, as some of you may remember, 15 or 20 years ago, and in order to use it, you had to go in a special room. Okay, because the cameras were too expensive, the compression, decompression were too expensive. And I remember being invited to a certain meeting, and they say the nearest room, oh, there is a Kinko telepresence facility that's right in your town. Think about how limiting that is if you have to go to a special facility. And I think we have similar problems with telepresence. We have to go to a facility, something which has some cameras. And I think one solution to that is to build lots of cameras into the headset. So here is a prototype that we're working with our friends at Eximers. And in some ways, it looks like just like any other AR headset. It's a standard kind of AR see-through. The thing that's different about it is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cameras all around. And as the cameras get smaller, there'll be more of them. Imagine 20 tiny little cameras all around. So what they can do is they can reconstruct through various fields of view that they have, your face, your body, and your surroundings. So now, if some user is in the hospital and he's or she is the expert in this particular system, when the people have trouble, they don't have to worry about the person going from the hospital to a special room. He's there in his bed. But because these people here could go to wherever the problem is in the lab, the person here in the hospital will see the surroundings and will see the others and will say, oh yeah, the problem with this 3D printer is not really with the printer itself. It's just that the head is stuck, and oh, right there I could see there's a special tool. That's the thing you want to fix it with. Do you all understand here? Everybody's wearing the same kind of headset. Okay, now I want to give you two examples of this that we're working on. One is to try to see what kind of interaction we can have without any installed cameras. And the second is social interaction, which involves a virtual personal assistant that is engaged with the person and with the others there. So let me quickly go to this.
VR?
Sure, let's meet virtually in your room.
Okay.
Can you hear that audio?
Hey,
So here is the
hey,
trainer.
can you wait for me?
Here
Can you
is
wave
the
your hands?
user. Okay,
can
this
hear you.
is just the
Awesome.
tripod that we have set up.
Could you
this
walk around your
person's
room,
phone.
please?
This reconstruction is done just from cameras that this guy had
Wait,
before,
can you sit on the
that
couch?
he reconstructed his room. And then this is just a crude reconstruction of him right
Awesome.
now from his head-worn camera.
Next, can you
Y'all
try
see
doing
that?
some kicks and punches?
And the trainer, of course, is someplace else in his own place.
Awesome. Now let's try some yoga stretches to warm up.
In fact, what you're seeing here is, of course, what the trainer sees. So you'll see the
That's
trainer's own interaction.
Now, could you start with some knee lifts? Could you lift your left knee, please? Again? Can I see your left knee again? Awesome.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
you get the idea. There's
Can you do
nothing
some running in
here
place?
except what the person is wearing on his head. Okay? The other thing I want to show you quickly is the notion of a virtual personal assistant. So this is like Siri or Alexa. But now, if it's in your eyeglasses, now they're aware of where you are and what you're looking at. So here's a simple example from one of our students. The virtual personal assistant is inspired by Eve from a recent Pixar movie. And you could ask it questions like, go to Henry's office.
We will first turn left at robotics lab. Follow me.
So the person knows, oh, and then
Would you like to know more about this poster?
how did that person, the VPA knows, is because they knew that they were looking
This poster
in this
says
direction.
that it is located in Chapel Hill.
Got the camera.
Would you like to know more about Chapel Hill?
I could tell you more about
Yes.
You understand?
Chapel Hill is a town in Orange, Chatham, and Durham counties in the U.S. state of North Carolina.
Of course, you could do this by
Its
taking
population
Siri and
was
taking a photo of it.
57,233
need
in
to
the
think about it.
2010 census, making.
Can you take me to Henry's office?
We will turn left at robotics lab. Follow me.
The difficulty with this demo is the student started halfway across the building. Okay, so this, the system
Turn
knows
left here.
something about the layout of this part of the computer science department. And, now you're actually going to Henry's office, which is on the other side of the building. But there's something here where the student stopped for a while to look at something. And then you'll see that this robot sort of goes farther away. You'll see it gets smaller, I think. You see it sort of moving away, and then it realizes, wait, you're not following. You see, it's like farther away.
Would you like to continue to Henry's office?
So why
Yes.
did it ask to continue? It's
We
because
will follow me.
the user stopped to look at something, right? I'm sorry that this person in the way didn't stay in the way, because one of the things that we want to work on is if there's somebody in the way, then you want to make sure that the robot goes around them. If there's somebody blocking it, then they should say, wait, let's go in another direction. You understand this? So this is just a mashup of your AR glasses and the thing that you have right now in your phone anyway.
We have arrived. Would you like
Is that
to go
clear?
somewhere else?
Okay? We don't need to go through
Take
more
me
of
to
this.
the reading room.
This gets boring after a while, okay?
We will follow
Okay?
me.
But let me just end with one slide of thought. Okay, my feeling is that there is going to be more social interaction, which is really great as mixed reality improves. But again, I think that the problem is the AR headsets are what's not ready. Okay, even the best of these, for example, I think HoloLens 2 is great. is not something that we would feel comfortable wearing on hours on end. And if we're not comfortable wearing it for hours on end, then we're not going to use it for hours on end, which means we cannot benefit from it. So it needs, in my view, three things. It needs comfort to wear for hours on end. It needs a wide field of view, so we could append things to any place in your field of view, and it needs a good enough see-through so you could wear them like ordinary eyeglasses. I want to thank the people who are doing this. This is a 2019 photo because we haven't gotten to take a 2020 photo. Thank you for asking me to be on this panel. I think this topic is really great.
Thanks. So let's move on to Anthony. So, I mean,
let me stop sharing.
Yep.
Hold on. Stop sharing. I've stopped.
Yep.
Hello. Coming after Henry, I thought I'd talk about a little bit less about technology and more about what the objectives might be for this area. And that's based on the idea that actually we've known that there's some advantages to this sort of 3D XR interaction for well over 20 years now. These are just old pictures from studies that we did when I was a student and a postdoc, where people that were immersed were just more effective at communication in certain situations. So these days we might say, well, can you do this task on Zoom or on some other video conferencing system? And these tasks are sort of, you can just about imagine doing them on these types of environments or with these types of form of interaction where you're looking through a window. But the key things that we noticed in this work are that there's a very rich set of gestures in immersive virtual reality, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here. It's also choir-sized, which is rather nice. That we all feel that there's good reasons for doing this, right? So what I want to just then highlight is in the more recent work, we've sort of come into understanding about why this is, why people are quite adept at using the social virtual reality. And that one of the things there is that people can appropriate it very easily. And I think this is one of my rants about VR people, is that we think too much about the interface and not what it is that it's constituted for the users once they're interacting. And what I mean by that is, if you look at some of the success stories of HCI, the thing is very appropriable so that they can use it for different things. And that's what we do in social situations. I pick up things and I use them and I go, look at this, or this, or this. I mean, it's an object for a resource. It could be a pen, it could just be pointing and so on. And we don't do enough of that in the social side. So that's one of something that really should we think about, is that video only really allows us to share things that are already on our computers. And the thing that excites me about the AR and the VR is that I can show you this and I can explain how it works. It happens to be a Japanese puzzle. And once you could look down and I could manipulate it, we can have fun with this. But waving it around in front of Zoom is no fun whatsoever. So here's a study we did with a social VR system at the moment. The appropriation that's going on here, and apologies if you know this already, because one of my favorite anecdotes is this gesture is impossible in almost all social VR systems because it's supposed to represent a different one-finger gesture that is impossible in social VR because it's rude in most cultures, right? Which involves extending your middle finger and swearing at somebody. This is the type of thing that you can appropriate. So they appropriated this different gesture, right? This is a group of students that knew each other really well and decided they wanted to swear at each other with their body language, and they weren't allowed because the only gesture they could do on the system was the tapping the side of the head, which just makes it what in UK that just means you're daft, right? You're an idiot. So I don't think the people that designed this actually thought that through. But anyway, there you go. So appropriation is one thing, and it goes quite deep. So in some recent studies, and this is what we're doing at the moment, we're analysing the impact of the technology we produce on people's social cognition. So this is extending some work that's about how people use their bodies and noticing very fine scale detail and trying to model that. So again, I've given similar talks a few times at conferences, but we can tell from the body language here what's going on, and the body language here that something very different is going on. We can read these pictures instantly. And the one thing I wanted to note is that in the VR, people are appropriating their own representations. So their representation themselves is a resource for thinking about the world and collaborating. So here is somebody shielding information from being observed using their avatar in a way that we didn't tell them to do. So if they're going to do that automatically, and they have any one of those social VRs that Kangsoo showed, where you disappear at the legs, then this isn't going to work. So I think we need to think through a little bit more, that if we start and do a bit more observation of how people use these social systems and therefore trying to support the tasks they're going to do. And that's a challenge to the people being technology, is how much do you know about how people are using the social VR systems now, and comparing that to real collaboration and seeing if there's a gap, and can we build tools to fill that gap and make people more productive and have more fun in the social VR. Okay.
Thanks a lot. So let me share the screen for Grace. So give me a second. Yes. So can you see this screen now?
Okay, super. Yeah, it's great to be here. I think Anthony's talk is a great lead into what I'm going to briefly talk about. And I just wanted to have a very short summary of some of the studies that we're doing in the social XR realm. And we're kind of solidly in a social science interpretation of how people interact in social VR, because not only are we interested in using new technology, but we are interested in how people create meaning from that interaction. So how do they interact? How do they start forming relationships? What do these relationships look like both within the virtual world, and then when they finish interactions in the virtual world, and once they come out, we know over multiple studies that once you remove the headset, it doesn't mean that the virtual world ends there for you. And so we're also interested in how it interacts with the physical interactions that you have in the real world. And then also how that feeds right back into the virtual world interactions. So next slide, please. One area of work is kind of looking at, well, what does this really look like for the future of work, and how we envision the way that we work in groups, but when physical location stops becoming relevant in this area of social VR. Next slide. So we are interested, and we had this great opportunity of launching a study during IEEE VR 2020 that took place in March. And surprisingly, and I did this major literature review, this is actually the first completely standalone virtual/online conference in the history of conferences, which is a bit surprising. But typically the virtual elements of academic conferences have always been treated as sort of a, almost an afterthought, or like a little element, a bonus element of the actual conference, where you can interact in person, and then you can have some sort of an online interaction as an aside to the actual conference. But with IEEE VR, we actually took almost 2,000 attendees, and in a variety of different platforms, we're able to engage in different online interactions. And we're interested in, well, how does this look like? And are we able to do something like this in the future? Next slide. What yeah, this is a quick video of one of the birds of a feather sessions we had for women in XR, I believe. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? So what we noticed, and this is just a quick summary of our findings, which is currently under review, so I'm not at liberty to share everything. But what we did notice was that the registration almost skyrocketed after announcing that this was going to be a free conference for all. And there was a significant uptick in student participations. And also, if you look at the top panel, that's the number of registrations before we announced the free conference, and the bottom panel is after we announced that this would be free. And so you can see that the number of countries being represented, which is sort of the titles, the subtitles, the captions that you see on the left side, has dramatically increased. And so lots of attendees told us that they would not have been able to travel to Atlanta for a variety of reasons, even barring COVID. Some of them were not able to pay for the international travel. Some of them were not at institutions where they would cover the high registration fees. Lots of students were not able to access the conference prior to this. But after announcing that this would be a free conference, we actually went from about 500 registrations to over 2,000 in a matter of days. Next slide. And we also asked participants, well, why do you attend academic conferences? And most of them, so we got over 400 responses from the attendees, and they said that the most important elements is keynotes, talks, and panels. And they thought that IEEE VR 2020 did this fairly well. So that was the best thing that IEEE VR did as a virtual platform. Now, the second important thing was socializing, but participants felt that socialization was one of the weakest links in their experience during this virtual platform, and it just did not work very well in hubs, which is really interesting because if you were to ask me, and if I were to try to predict a group of people who would be the most amenable to a virtual conference, it would be this group, right? It would be this group of VR scholars or people, industry people who are excited about VR. And if you ask, most of the attendees actually said that yes, I do own a VR headset at home, but no, I did not wear the VR headset during IEEE VR, although I had the option to, and although it was accessible, it was lying right next to me. Many people, I would say most of the respondents who got back to us said that they did not use immersive VR. And typically, it's because it's too immersive, which is almost counter-interactive, right? So if it's too immersive and I have to put on the VR headset and that is the only thing that I'm able to do, it's actually really high in social presence, but sometimes for many of these tasks that we have to do in the real world, high social presence is actually a detriment. We don't want high social presence because we want to be able to do multiple tasks. And so if many of your projects are geared towards focusing just on social presence, maybe that's not the answer that we want to go towards. However, overall satisfaction of the conference experience was relatively high. So we know that this has potential, but we need to have more realistic, I guess, thinking about what the elements are about an academic conference that we want in the context of VR. So do we want to make it completely immersive? That seems to be not the case. Do we want to make it where we have 8 different platforms and everybody is using a different platform? That seems to be a bit confusing for many of the people. So this work is currently under review, and we would be more than happy to share it once it is published. So let's go to the next slide. And then another area that's related to this area of studies is how do the families work within this context of future of work? And what are some of the family communications and interactions that they're able to have using and leveraging what we can provide with social XR? Next slide. So Kyle Johnson at University of Georgia and I are working on a project that is called the Virtual Family Rooms. And this is geared towards families who need to be physically separated, and not just because of COVID, but it might be because of military deployment, or it might be because of business travel. I travel a ton, or I used to travel before COVID. And when you have younger children at home, this video conferencing, I don't know if you've ever tried it, it does not work. They do not want to sit in front of the computer and say, hi, mom, this is what I did today, or this is what I did with my friends. Or if you want to get them on the phone, that doesn't work either, because the phone conversation tends to be very information based, right? What did you do at school today? And then they'll say nothing. Or what did you eat today? I don't know. And so that's typically how the conversation tends to go, which really is counterproductive. And it turns out that in family communication, younger children need to share experiences with their parents, and sharing experiences, like Anthony pointed out, is very limited through video conferencing because you don't have the shared space, right? You're not able to share the spatial cues with that person, which really limits your ability to share experiences with each other. And particularly for children, this is a huge barrier for communication. So if you click on the video, you might be able to, there you go. So we created a space essentially that looks like a family home, and you're able to engage in interactions or activities that you used to do as a family. And this might range all the way from playing basketball or going into a game room and playing chess or remote control cars with your parents or with your siblings. And this can also include things like doing homework together. So we have a whiteboard where you can draw pictures, or you can solve, mathematical assignments together. And we even have a movie room where you can enjoy things like family movie nights. And so all of these things seem very mundane, but are very almost impossible to try to do through video conferencing. Next slide. And so we're trying to use the social XR platform to preserve these family routines, which have been shown to lead to an increase in quality of family communication. So it's not based just on the frequency. You need to have higher quality family communication to essentially build bonds, to build the shared experience, and therefore build a family unit that can stay resilient through these barriers of physical location. And so that's sort of what we're trying to do, which is not based just on games, but sharing these lived experiences by providing a shared space. So that's sort of where we are right now. We've gone through several focus group interviews with military families with experiences in deployment, and it's just amazing to see their responses to how they're just like, I miss so much of my childhood or my children's childhood because of deployment. Some people miss births, some people miss the growing years, and they're just amazed at the potential to be able to share these experiences using social XR. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And then let's stop. And then let's move on to Aleshia's slide.
Yeah. One second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully you can see my intro slide. Hi, yes, I am. Yeah, my name's Dr. Aleshia Hayes, and I am an assistant professor at University of North Texas. So first of all, I'm super honored to even be on a panel with pioneers of the field and people I highly respect. So this is so exciting for me. I am really interested in social XR and the future of XR because I'm really driven by my interest in human-computer interaction and how we can improve the way that we use existing technologies. So while Anthony and Henry are talking about improving the actual technology, the hardware, the graphics and all of that, I'm more looking at, now that they've done all of this amazing work, how do we apply this? And I want to start with, let me make sure I'm on the right slide. I want to start with my focus begins with this idea of efficacy versus effectiveness of technology. So when I talk about human-computer interaction, I think a lot about not just efficacy, but remember, efficacy is about the performance under ideal controlled circumstances. And most of us as scientists, we're looking at the ideal controlled circumstance, right? We put people in a lab, and then we have people who know how to use the technology. There's no tech issues. Zoom always works. You know, there's no teacher who doesn't understand how to reboot a computer, things like that that sometimes happen. And instead, I want to look at efficacy, like what happens in real world conditions. And that's the definition that kind of NIH gives us. But that distinction of efficacy versus effectiveness is so important to me, because while the impacts of the evolution of the hardware are important, I want to know what actually happens in the world we live in. So just super quickly, I look at efficacy and effectiveness, but in terms of user efficacy and effectiveness, then I also add user experience. And user experience is kind of this nebulous term that includes so many things. And very frequently, we just look at one or two things. But when we're talking about user experience in social XR, I want to make sure to include the idea of social presence. My research primarily focuses on social presence. And for me, social presence is an element of user experience, particularly when we're talking about social XR. My research of social presence began when I started looking at ways of enabling physical movement in mixed reality classrooms by tracking users' movements so we could kind of simulate proximity that we use in real life, and finding that, yes, it does improve presence. It also improves social presence. So my ability to walk up to a virtual student and lean into them actually affects my experience with that virtual student. And in this environment, the students were not real, they were controlled by a human in the loop, but theoretically, and we also see research that shows that gaze and things like that and these kinds of environments also affect outcomes. So efficacy, but also effectiveness, because the other thing that we were looking at was, do things that people learn in this virtual environment transfer to their interactions with real people, which is one of the things I'm really interested in when we talk about XR for social interaction. I'm also interested in our ability to improve all of our interactions. So my first master's degree was in communication, and I used to have debates with people about computer-mediated communication versus face-to-face communication. And then what I found is that my real position on that is, what would be ideal is if we could put them together, right? And now we have this world where we can really do that. We can really mix the best parts of physical interactions with the best parts of virtual interactions. And like Henry was talking about, we're not there yet, but we are in a theoretical place where we can do that. The research has told us a great deal, but as Mel Slater stated years and years before I realized it, one of the things I noticed in my research was that the subjective measures only got me so far, because users don't really know what they experience all the time, and sometimes they're embarrassed. So the thing that I'm excited about the future of XR is that many of our new technologies are allowing us to have tools that do pupillometry and other physiological metrics, and also theoretically, some work that I'm still proposing, integrating the other kinds of measurements so we can actually track behaviors, physiology, and subjective measures, and not just to be invasive, like we won't name any names of companies because I might ask them for funding one day, but invasive like some companies have been known to be, but more to use these kind of mixed methods to inform our own behavior. For instance, one of the things that I would love to see is the ability for me to reflect on my behavior, my interactions with people, to know if I'm being assertive or aggressive, if I'm monopolizing a conversation or not talking enough, if my behaviors seem open or closed to people, these kinds of things. So not only do I see this technology being able to improve our ability to communicate remotely, I also see this being able to enhance our face-to-face communications long-term. And I'm so excited about that, because as much as I love VR and I'm very interested in researching all these emerging technologies, like Grace said, when I go to virtual conferences, most of the time I don't have the headset on, and I was trying to find the image that she had shared with me on Twitter during the conference, because I was logged in to the environment in 2 different places, and I had the headset set down because I don't like wearing it, and I was in the environment on the desktop. My head was inverted in my body, and I had a pretty bad experience with that. And I am, of course, one of the experts. If you're not seeing this, it's air quotes experts. So I think I maybe went a little on a tangent there, but so I'm primarily focusing on the ways we use social presence to impact learning. And I just gave a couple of examples of places that I like a lot for the ability to have access through a VR headset or a desktop, because like I mentioned, I don't love wearing a VR headset all the time. But more importantly to me, for learning outcomes, there are issues with access and accessibility. So students with disabilities may have limitations, but also right now, while we're all very happy that the Oculus Quest was only $299, $299 is still prohibitive for most families. So the idea that we can still have something on a $200 computer where people may be able to engage with people who are in a VR headset is something that I think we should all be considering. And then in terms of my upcoming research, I'm really interested in ideas of representation. And I think of representation, of course, as issues of diversity related to ethnicity and appearance and ability. But right now I'm focusing specifically on representation in terms of my own representation and the way that people interpret having a trainer that is high fidelity, that looks like them, or a high fidelity trainer that does not look like them, and seeing how that impacts learning outcomes and also perceptions of the instructor, and also engagement. So, and maybe even self-efficacy, because if I get funded for one thing where I'm looking to train young women about STEM, and I'm hoping that using an avatar that is a person of color might be more impactful to students who are of color. And there are many ethical questions about this, about like who should be allowed to represent themselves in what way, those kinds of things. But those are all questions that I'm interested in exploring. And I was going to get into the metrics, but I'll just say really quickly because I don't want to go over on my time. I'm really interested in this idea of using multiple metrics to really understand these questions. And I think everyone here kind of feels the same way. Self-report is great, it's just not enough, but being able to understand behavior, physiology helps. But I think the most important thing for this is looking at longitudinal studies and seeing how things are sustainable over time. You know, everyone thinks VR is really cool the first time they try it, but like most of us, we're not wearing VR headsets all the time, which is why I completely agree with Henry on the idea that AR and MR are probably where the larger scale future changes are going to come with XR for social interaction. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for all the amazing, inspiring talks. So, I mean, we are a little behind the schedule, but so I have a few questions, but I would like to include all the audience in this panel because, I mean, we're not that many people. So while I'm asking questions, you can also prepare the questions and then you can type on the chat box or like try to raise your hands or like enable your audio. So I can start the first question. So, I mean, this is not originally that I wanted to ask, but while I'm listening to your presentation, I kind of wonder, do you actually use a VR regular base, not behind, like apart from the research wise, in your normal life, do you actually use a VR? Honestly, I'm not using, so
I play
was just
Beat
curious.
Saber. Beat Saber is very fun.
You mean the game?
Yes.
Play it every day?
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. Every
I
month.
have my lab meetings in VR.
Oh, that's nice. Is it because of the COVID-19 or, I mean, before the COVID, did you actually do that?
We didn't before COVID. We've only done it since, and that's partly because it's nice and stable. If you use the same, and obviously you need a £300 or $300 device going to everybody, but that's nothing compared to what it usually costs to run our lab. So yeah, we meet up. We was 3 times a week, but now it's Friday afternoons immediately before this. Actually, we were sat around in Rec Room. We tend to tour around and kick the tires of all the social VR systems and break them, and then we always end up in Rec Room.
Oh.
Yeah, we started doing the same with our project group for the virtual family room. We met in the family room and played games. And so we started out immersive VR, but it turns out that it's too limited. Like I can only be in VR and I can't do other things and multitask, or, you know, my kid asks for something and then you have to flip it up and it's just such a hassle. And so now we've ported over to Mozilla Hubs and we have weekly meetings in Hubs.
What about Henry? Do you use?
Let's see. As Aleshia was saying, let's see. Should I be sensitive to the fact that we get support from some companies that make some really lovely products? Aleshia, is that covering the bases enough?
I think so. I think so.
I think that there are a number of really nice products out there.
I see. Okay.
I'm on Zoom much of most days, and unlike most people, I think I love it. I love it, and what I like about, well, I think it's just so much improved over the last thing that I was on for the last 15 years, which I don't want to mention, but I think that they really stepped up to allow this kind of thing where we have 20, 30, 40 people in classes of 60, 80, and I tell you what I love about this. What I love about this is seeing people's video. And even though I participated in, as Grace said, the first conference, I was totally on VR and I had my headset nearby, I was the same way that she is and others, that I was doing it, you know, driving around on my large screen. I primarily, I think, Grace, what you mentioned, that there's so many times when I want to get something, I just want to get a drink of water here, and, you know, I have to remove it. So I think that we should celebrate the fact how great it is that we could get together and see each other's faces and video and expressions. And there's so much that is so much better about that than audio, that even though I don't use the VR headsets, I think that we in the community have really come a long ways in terms of not having to evangelize people to the notion of social interaction. People now, everybody knows the capabilities of teleconferencing and knows the limitations. As Anthony points out, you know, you can't even look down on something. And I find that happening all the time in my classes, that I have to pick up something and it's not the same thing as looking down and dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long answer to your short question. No, I don't use VR much, but I'm really celebrating that televideo has come such a long ways just in the last 12 months.
I would like to add, I completely agree. And I would like to add one thing that I did find was that when I was in Verbella, I believe, for the iLearn conference this summer, when people were using their hands in the environment, that made me want to put the headset on. So it wasn't necessarily being able to look around that I cared about, but I loved the idea that they were gesturing with their hands and I was just standing there and I was like, oh, I need my headset so I can gesture with my hands. So I don't know exactly what that means about the affordances and what the future is going to look like exactly, because I don't know that that necessarily means we need VR, because we could do that with AR. And maybe not have the limitations that we don't like our actual environments being included.
And then
Yeah,
there's
so some of our work suggests that this space with arm's reach is incredibly important for sort of your own cognition and understanding of the environment as well as other people. So there's quite a few papers, theories out there which we can build on about why the hands are important. And I spend most of my time on Zoom. I don't like it, right? I find it very hard to watch the video, right? I'll be frank, right? I mean, I listen, right? And I tend not to watch it, except in specific situations, generally when I'm talking for some reason. But when other people are talking, I don't find I have, I find it hard to watch, tiring to watch. Yeah.
And then what's the most important like affordance, like a social cues that you want to, I mean, of course, a lot of people use these like hand gesturing, or like even these days people kind of trying to use multimodal feedback on social via like haptics, but yeah.
I think the most important cues is their facial expressions. And that's, for me, so important. And that's why I asked the host to encourage people to turn on videos, because I think that we get a lot of feedback from people's facial expressions of how much attention they're paying, how interested they are, do they think positively about what's going on or negatively. So I think that those subtle cues, I think, are going to be more and more with us, and I think they're hard to capture in avatars. I mean, I encourage people who are working on that, but I think that's a really difficult thing.
What do you guys think about Zoom fatigue? I feel like Henry and Anthony are like diametrically opposed on this topic.
I can do work, obviously I can work on it. I just find it tiring. Partly it's because Henry identifies that there's cues that you can use. There's just a lot of them, right? There are 21 sets of cues. It's just hard work to parse them all. And I think in the real world, we do that through attention monitoring. And I have a gut feeling, if you wanted a PhD topic to work on, not you, Aleshia, but somebody, that actually there's too much information in Zoom, right? There's just too much in a small space, and that our brain is better at laying it out, and that our attentional focus is partly coping with the fact that we've got too much. And and there's some rationale behind that there is a coping strategy in the real world, and there are dysfunctions of social behaviors which are very much like that, right? People get hyper focused and lack of focus in social situations. I think a bit of sort of amateur psychology there is really important. But interesting other people's opinions about that. I have a really large screen actually, and partly Henry and I have this discussion in the past. It may work on a bigger screen, right, more spread out, so I can attend to the speaker more and then get more feedback and select more. But at the moment, there's so many video that you're all about here in my vision. One person's like this, and therefore I can see lots of it.
Yeah, Fahrenheit wants to say.
Could I add to that? I completely agree with Anthony. I think that a lot has to do with this narrow focus versus wide. And so I was just measuring my two monitors are 27-inch and 4K. And while I'm very aware that I have a luxury to do that, like Aleshia was saying, that very few people can afford these kinds of things. But I benefit from the fact that there are these two large monitors and they're all around me. And I have my nice high-res laptop here also. And so I can go back and forth. And then I could, if I want to, I can pin somebody. So, if I want to see Aleshia, then I could say pin to first screen. And then I see her larger, even though somebody else may be talking. And so I think that flexibility really makes it a pleasure for me. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see family and friends that I don't get to see before, because before this year, people weren't on televideo. It's like it would be an unusual, elderly relative who would be up for televideo. And now all of them are. And so it's wonderful.
Yeah, but
We
a
have
part of me
churches to thank for
wonders
that.
whether, yeah, part of me wonders whether it's Zoom fatigue in particular, or whether we're just having too many meetings. It doesn't matter what platform it is. It's just back to back to back to back meetings. If you had 7 other meetings in person, I would be dead.
Oh, you're totally right. You are so right.
By the way, Fern has some question, I guess, or
Yeah, still, thank you. Yeah, I was maybe to change a bit the topic. So for the presentation I've seen, so for most of you, in most of the cases, these social VR experiences were limited to, let's say, to few people. So like maybe 2 persons trying to accomplish a task, or maybe a class, family. But what about some social experiences involving more massive amount of people? Maybe like a conference, because for example, something that I really feel frustrating in these, let's say, massive events, that it is hard to grab people to talk and to maybe, like, you know, more this spontaneity that you can have in a real life, this is a real life, in a physical conference. And so I don't know, wondering about maybe like changes in the social behavior, because maybe with little amount of people, seems that maybe we can find the same amount of behaviors, but sometimes in hubs, so even people, like, they are talking and they don't realize that maybe it's a private conversation, maybe there are people around and they don't realize that these people are around. And so I don't know, maybe I am like digressing a bit, but what about this like massive social experiences? We will be able to do that? It's okay. Maybe what are the challenges, and maybe you have some insights on this.
Yeah, so based on our interviews and observations throughout the entire IEEE VR 2020 event, what we find is that it really depends on your willingness and patience to work through the technological learning curve. But once you get there, I think a lot of people mention kind of the opposite, where they said that, you know, in a typical in-person conference, you would only be able to gather around and maybe like a pretty small knit circle. And for you to expand that circle to like 9, 10, 12 people would be virtually impossible because of so many other people going around at the conference. But here you had the option to fly up and go to the ceiling where they can congregate wherever they want using the spatial audio feature. And so they were fairly impressed by the ability to not be on Zoom like this, because if you're on Zoom, then whatever you say better be open to the rest of the public. But in VR, you're able to use spatial audio and go and find different corners of the room where you are able to have these social conversations. The one thing that they did mention is that because of the lack of the micro cues, if someone is standing right behind you, then it's really difficult to know whoever it is, because you don't feel that body heat, right? You don't feel like rustling of clothing. You just don't know of any presence that is not directly in your field of vision. So some people did, they were able to kind of work around and find the benefits, but then others were, they were disappointed in the sense that not enough people were in hubs to begin with. That's why you didn't really have that spontaneity in meeting different people. And the hubs rooms themselves were cut at about like 15 to 20 people per room. So you had to essentially hop around the rooms. And that was a big, I guess, a shortcoming. But if we're able to figure out a way to allow for effective spatial audio for a massive number of people, I think that's where a lot of the future of this massive gathering will be. As for right now, I think we're sort of limited in the sense that spatial audio doesn't work with that high number of people, or at least in hubs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just point out that there's quite a lot of good work in the games industry on this for massively multiplayer games, and some old VR stuff, right? So Benford's and Farland's spatial model of interaction, and so the key things there are that there are techniques out there, and the second thing to mention is that architects are really good at this. There was a generation that grew up with VR and was quite, there was so sort of the desktop based, the game based, that's actually, we can engage with them to build spaces which are legible as providing privacy. Obviously the starting place is just use like real world structures. real world room, bookable rooms, that type of thing, doors that lock. But there are more creative ways of thinking about that and engaging with I'm going to go back and try and get architects interested again, because they've drifted onto other things now. But they are, there were architects that designed spaces in Second Life, for example, specifically with privacy objectives in mind. But they were back in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm. I mean, sorry about that, but we're running out of time. I actually wanted to cover a lot of different topics, like social cost of these social exile, or like ethical or privacy issues, or the generation difference using this technology. But maybe I will prepare another panel next different conference. But yeah.
Thank you for organizing this.
Yeah. Thank you
Yes.
for joining this panel. Thanks a lot. And then I guess Garrett needs to start the closing remarks soon. But thanks a lot, all of you guys.
Thank you.